Hey everybody, welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. I'm your host, Mike Malatesta. I'm an entrepreneur who's founded and led 2 8-figure companies. I'm also an investor, author, speaker, and lifetime learner. On this podcast, I explore stories of success in every episode and with every guest. What it means, why it's important, and of course, how it happens. You can subscribe, connect, and learn more about me at MikeMalatesta.com. Today, I'm fulfilling my promise to you with another amazing success story. David Hertz joins me on the podcast. David is the founder of David Hertz Architects. He's known around the world for creating some of the most gorgeous, unique, and environmentally sustainable homes. Like the one he made out of a decommissioned Boeing 747, for example, aptly named the Wing House. Andy and his wife Laura also founded SkySource.org. They designed an enclosed system called WEDEW that makes fresh water from air. It's remarkable. SkySource won the 2018 XPRIZE for this technology. Here we go. Hey, David, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I've been looking forward to talking with David Hertz since January, when I first became aware of him. And for folks who've listened to the show before, you've heard me talk time and again about Abundance 360 and about Peter Diamandis and about all the cool things that I've learned in the couple of years that I've been a part of the program. And one of the things that Peter's involved in, I guess it's sort of outside of Abundance 360, he's involved in a lot of stuff, but sort of connected to it too is the XPRIZE. And we were just on a previous episode talking with Rob Syke, who is also an Abundance 360 member, who is sort of considering getting, putting his hat in the ring on the newest XPRIZE, David, which is the carbon removal XPRIZE that Elon Musk is sponsoring. But I have never, ever had the opportunity to talk to someone who's actually won the XPRIZE as you and your wife have. So I'm really looking forward to getting to that. And, of course, to your whole career as well. So, David, I start every podcast with the same simple question. How did it happen for you?
Yeah, I think, it's a process rather than an event.
Sure.
I mean, I grew up in good fortune and in terms of so many ways, which is a kind of a miracle. I mean, that we're all here, that we're alive, that we made the swim, and then I had some great parents. My father is a doctor and an author and a sculptor, and my mom an artist. So in a lot of ways, my background as an architect is a merging of science and art. And I also really had an early connection to nature. I grew up in Southern California. I grew up surfing. Surfing was always healing for me. I grew up with a severe kind of eczema as a child. So the ocean was one of the only places where I really found solace and connected with nature and the ocean, surfing. And I started off really first as an environmentalist. And then ultimately I had to rationalize my place in the world as someone who's part of the built environment, which is very destructive. And decided to stay within my passion of the built environment, but how do I lessen the impacts of the built environment on the natural world? And that's what I've been doing for 37 years as an architect, with a kind of boutique practice that really specializes in regenerative architecture that ultimately gives back more than it takes, and have been involved with some other investigations and inventions. I invented a advanced cement-based composite in the early 80s and built that company over 20 years and sold it to a large public company in 2006. And I like to joke, I've been practicing architecture, until all that money is gone. So architecture is really a passion, and the Water Abundance XPRIZE was, it seemed very interesting because in Southern California, we're acutely aware of the importance of water. And I just started to study water and realized what an amazing substance. And I actually had started at my small office in Venice, right off the Venice boardwalk, where we have a lot of homelessness during a sustained 6-year drought, where the county had kind of turned off a lot of the facilities that homeless were using for water. And I kind of began to be aware that there's a lot of water in our atmosphere. And I developed a small atmospheric water generator using solar energy, incorporated street art, put it in my alley right off the Venice boardwalk, and put a bottle filling station and just offered free water. The idea is really about the democratization of water, not the commodification of it, sold to us in plastic bottles by big corporations. Why shouldn't water be free and available to all? And that just put me in a unique position to compete for the Water Abundance XPRIZE.
And that, so you laid down a bunch of stuff there, so it's great. We got a lot of places to go, but I want to focus on the free water. So that, you said you created a solar powered generator, or so was that actually like sort of the pilot for what became the WEDEW, which we'll get into what that is, or was it something completely different but started your sort of brain working on this bigger like how to create water in places where there is no water, not just due to a drought, there's just no water?
Right. It was kind of an early stage prototype, but the final derivation of it for the XPRIZE definitely changed and advanced from that point. But the ideas around democratization of water, around point of use water solutions versus centralized water solutions that require transportation of water long distances at great energy cost, was definitely the impetus of it, and continues to be the impetus of it post XPRIZE and into implementation, and how we can kind of create social and environmental projects. It's just that the kind of series of services that I've kind of organized ends up offering more than water. It offers energy, heat, refrigeration, carbon sequestration, and a host of other things, because at its root, we're using natural system thinking to create a kind of a cascade of in a virtuous cycle of benefits. And it's antithetical kind of to the way that some of our systems are now. They're not nature-based, that end up leading to a lot of negative consequences, and these ends up having a series of positive consequences.
Okay. And let me ask you a question about the homelessness. So you see this need and you create a solution for it that's different than handing out water bottles to people, which is maybe the path that most people would take or think to take. But I'm also wondering about and this may be my ignorance or it may be but a lot of people, it feels like, want to help homeless people, but they don't necessarily want homeless people coming to their place of work in order to assist them, because they've maybe, you walk through a city, you don't want to be the store where homeless people are camped out at your place. So I'm just curious how you dealt with it, whether you felt that way or how you dealt with it, because you've got employees and I don't know. So I'm just curious.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's definitely an issue, but the reality in our community was that there was a lot of homeless in our alley anyway.
Okay.
And so it wasn't really a nuisance in terms of attracting homeless. And what we found in this kind of social experiment was that generally it's the kind of residences or businesses that are the most controlling, where there becomes the most divisiveness, where the homeless tend to aggregate. So if you're actually supportive, then you find that you can work within the ecosystem where there's a self-governance and a self-policing going on. So it's very interesting that our building on our street, especially during COVID, is the only building that doesn't have a homeless encampment in front of it. And that's because the other homeless police it because they see that we're
helping.
Contributing.
Right. Mm-hmm. Oh, very interesting. Okay. Oh, I like that. So they kind of create, yeah, that's really cool. Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. I'm glad I asked the question because I wasn't sure where that was going to go, and I didn't think it was going to go there. Well, I guess first let's go to surfing. When you mentioned the eczema and the surfing, the salt water maybe helped with that condition, but tell me, were your parents surfers as well, and or the rest of your siblings, if you have any? And I guess I'm really interested because I've never surfed, but I'm really interested in this, how it made you feel, and not just your skin, but inside, because it seemed like it was an experience that was maybe physical, but also way more than physical. And it's something you continue to do today, as I understand it.
Yes. I mean, I think the ocean is, it's such an immersive experience that you can kind of leave the terrestrial or whatever, like especially angst and anger that, a lot of young kids have growing up. It's a way to it's a universal solvent, in a way. It just washes off these cares, and it also is humbling because you're putting yourself in a kind of mysterious place where you don't really know what's beneath the surface, and where there are forces in physical forces of tides and currents and waves, and I'm just really compelled by that. The older I get, the more fascinating I am with that, and whether it's a kind of blue mind state or it's the negative ion, whether there's a physical, emotional state, but it's a pretty incredible experience. And then to actually challenge that, and it doesn't necessarily have to be saltwater. I mean, I just took 25 friends to the Kelly Slater wave pool in the middle of the desert, and it's freshwater, but it was just such an amazing bonding experience to all kind of do our own dance on these waves that are completely man-made.
So it's kind of like there's a way to harness the power of the waves but never control them, sort of. It's like an experience that's probably familiar because you probably go to the same areas a lot, but it's always, the familiarity is always maybe just I don't know. It can be what's the word I'm looking for? The familiarity can be masking something completely unexpected.
Yeah, or the familiarity, as the one constant, it becomes the thing that shows the uniqueness, right? Because if every experience, if every place was unique, you might not be as aware of the subtleties of how varied those subtleties are based on the constant.
Got it. And this concrete, well, is it Syndecrete? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
So what was the idea? Well, I know what the idea was, but how did you come to create that material and then a company around it? Because I'm kind of thinking like fly ash has been recycled in some form for a while, but still, I mean, I live in the Midwest. They're still not making concrete out of 100% or close to 100% recycled materials. It's still stone, sand, cement. And it's almost like efforts to put fly ash in or other types of waste are well, there's like resistance, so how did you get, and you did this a long time ago. Where'd the idea come from? How'd you get it off the ground?
I think like a lot of things, I just wasn't happy with what was available to me as an architect. That there were just certain products that were kind of manufactured, like a sink or a bathtub or fireplace or a planter or a tile. You would just pick them out of a catalog, and I thought we had lost our way in terms of craft. And I had worked in construction with concrete. I worked for an architect named John Lautner, who's worked with Frank Lloyd Wright, who did a lot of work with concrete. And so I just was fascinated with this as a medium, because it's kind of sculpture in reverse. It's a negative process. You're building something, you're filling it up, and it's in some ways it's kind of an additive manufacturing process that people talk about today, whether rather than taking something and subtracting something away, which yields waste. So it was just a fascinating process, but I felt ultimately limited with respect to the weight and the fragility of normal concrete, and said, how can I have more control over this so I don't have to do things on site? If I could precast everything off-site in a controlled manner. Now it needs to be lighter, and it needs to be strong enough to carry, but I have a lot more control. And so I started to look for lightweight aggregates, alternatives to sand and rock, got into volcanic materials that are already calcined, so they're essentially expanded. Things like genospheres that are spherical and hollow, but very strong. Really looked at the kind of clustering and packing of materials, and got into fly ash, which has basically been around since the invention of concrete, with
Right.
with Mount Vesuvius, and using what the Romans using the volcanic ash. And then I started looking at reinforcements using post-consumer carpet fiber, looked at billions of pounds of carpet that got wasted each year, and then ultimately developed this aggregate out of all recycled materials. So I would work a lot with companies and their own waste stream, things like discontinued records, or buttons or zippers, like for Patagonia, or Sony, computer parts and electronic components. So I got very interested in what we take, make, and waste in our society, and started really mining the waste stream. And that, I think any process that one goes through is, kind of your own sense of self-discovery in the process through any one material. And so yeah, it's very different in a way. I mean, that's been many years since I had sold that, and but I was very interested even in the early 80s with the idea of carbon sequestration in concrete, because carbon is the number one man-made waste byproduct that's affecting climate change, and concrete is the number one man-made material. So if you can get these two together, there's a lot of synergies.
In the production process was, you mentioned buttons and other things. So I don't know, were those sort of aggregate replacements? I'm trying to figure out how.
Those are all decorative. Yeah.
Oh,
So,
decorative.
I would,
Okay.
it's like a
Okay.
contemporary
Oh, cool.
terrazzo where I would grind these things down. So I would add all these things into the material. And that started with an accident, as a lot of things do. I was grinding these materials down and trying to achieve a finer and finer level of refinement and uniformity, to the point where we started to lose the character. We're at risk of losing the character of what we were doing in the first place, because people wanted it to be uniform. And I bought a plastic wheelbarrow, and it was new, and there was a spiral piece of this plastic that came out in the mix, and when we ground it down, I ended up with this blue plastic swirl, which was seen as a complete imperfection. And then it just sparked an idea. I said, well, that's actually really interesting. What if we put more plastic squirrels in there and, shavings? And so I started going around to manufacturers to say, hey, well, what kind of scrap do you have? And there's a brass screw manufacturer up the street, and a plastics recycler, and a, computer guy. And so I just started gathering these things, essentially seeding them in the material, grinding them down and exposing them, and made, all of these really interesting contemporary aggregates out of our waste stream.
And did other, how long did it take that to catch on, David? Did other people think you were sort of nuts, or did they think, oh my gosh, this is like a one of a kind thing that I can't get anywhere else? And so it kind of took off as being really special, or what, or maybe there was a
It's an
transition at some
evolutionary
point.
process. I
Yeah.
started really as, it was when I got out of architecture school, like the old joke at the time was, what do you call an architect? I was like, waiter, because that was the only job opportunity. Nobody was building. And so I had to kind of innovate, and I used I basically started by, I had a piece of glass that was left over from an old ugly table, and I wanted to make a base for it. And so I just made a form out of concrete and poured concrete. It cost me like $16 or something, and made this table with this concrete weight with a sheet of glass cantilevered out over it. And then I started making other furniture, because I said, well, I'm kind of, as a very young architect, I could have a certain control and immediacy of the process that I couldn't have with buildings. And I can get people to trust me to maybe make a piece of furniture instead of a whole building. And so I started to design furniture really as fine art, and exhibited that. And my work was in the Museum of Modern Art, and, all around the world. So I started off really as a kind of sculptor making furniture under commissions and public sculpture. And then, because of the weight, I started to look at lightweight alternatives. And then that gave me a realm into countertops and tiles and bathtubs, and a whole product division where I made, point of use products, and, commercial products for like the Gap and, other people.
Okay.
So yeah, I think the lesson that I learned is, you have to take the first step. And then once you take the first step, things start to unfold. So if you're going to work with a material, then, there's all kinds of things. I think the other thing is that I've always been a little bit more fascinated in the process than the end product. It's kind of boring to, like, it would have made more sense for me just to, scale this thing and just make tiles all day long. And, but I wasn't less interested in making money and the repetition, and more interested in reinventing the wheel and doing something that was challenging every time. And I think it's always been the challenging projects that I get the most excited by.
Yeah, like using 747 wings on a house, and maybe that's a little bit of a challenge. I'd like to get into that a little bit, but before we do, the so when was it that someone trusted you to build a whole house for them? Because I'm thinking to myself, you start making furniture, sculpture, beautiful pieces of art for people's homes and other things. It's, and you get into these museums, like a lot of people would say, like, okay, that's good enough. That's a great place for me to sort of hang out and just do what I want and be successful that way.
Yeah. And, you see a lot of artists spend their entire careers just, doing the same thing. And there's somewhat of a commercial trap to that, to any artist, right? I mean, if you're a successful, band, your agents and everybody want you to make that same music,
Yeah, same thing.
and,
Yep.
and if you're a successful painter and someone's buying it because, oh, that's a Rothko, and I want to show people that I have a Rothko, I don't want that Rothko to look like it's not a Rothko. And so, there is a kind of trap that happens, between commercialism and art. And but there's no question that sticking with one thing and doing that over and over, you could build a kind of a more successful commercial practice. And I've just put a little bit more personal emphasis on the challenge, not defining a style per se that everybody, some people can say, oh, that's like a David Hertz house, but one David Hertz house could look very different than another David Hertz house based on either my interest at the time or the specifics of the client or the site, and that's been the challenge. But I've always put process, I guess, over product.
And it's kind of, and I'm no expert in architecture, but it seems kind of unique too, because you mentioned Frank Lloyd Wright, so there's a lot of Frank Lloyd Wright homes in Wisconsin where I am, and while they may all be different, they're all, you look at them and you say, oh yes, that's a Frank Lloyd Wright home because of X and A, B, and C. But it seems like your approach has been, I want to build what I want to build, or I want to build what the client wants to build, and it doesn't matter to me if it looks like something that I built before, because this project's a new project. Am I on the right path there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why Frank Lloyd Wright, was iconoclastic. I mean, there was no uniquely American architecture.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, we came from Europe as colonists, and we just did what, say, Europe had. Like, there was a reason that the Tudor roof has a steep roof to shed snow. It's not maybe appropriate in California.
Yeah. Okay.
Like,
Yep.
why do we have these styles? There's a certain simulacra of just a style. It's just a decorated box with a different style. And I think Frank Lloyd Wright said, well, why are we not making architecture that's unique to its place, made out of the materials? And Wisconsin and what he did obviously in Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin was, he grew up as kind of in a farming family and was really interested in the plains, and so we're in the plains. We should create a horizontal architecture that deals with the horizontality of the plains, and we should use natural materials, and we should be aware of nature and follow the path of the sun. And he was really quite revolutionary and ahead of his time and radical in that mindset. And he created organic architecture as which is still, I think, again, most architecture is still conventional style based architecture. But I think there's been a huge resurgence in the idea of organic architecture. And I think people feel, in terms of residential architecture in particular, really connected to nature that way.
And I want to go back to when you were a kid. I think because you mentioned, sort of being an environmentalist, or you had an environmentalist mindset from a young age. Maybe was an impact from your family growing up, or maybe it's just something you came upon. But you said at some point you realized that you had to live in a built environment. I think that's what you said, a built environment. And I guess I'm wondering, when was the connection between, when did it dawn on you that you wanted to become an architect or build things, or go the path you ended up going?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and that ties into your question I didn't answer too, about my first house. And that first house, I was commissioned at 19, and I finished when I was 21. And my client still there, self-sufficient house in the desert, Nevada. In fact, she just reached out to me on Facebook after so many years, and
Really,
it was pretty amazing to hear that she's still there, and
so
appreciate
that's like
living
40
totally off the
years.
grid. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So so I was interested in architecture pretty early. My dad was a tinkerer and an inventor, and surgeon, but he was always, we were always in the workshop. So some of my earliest memories are being on the garage floor, looking up at him on the workbench and remodeling and tearing things apart and building things and going to the, lumber yard. And he did that with his father. His father built a whole Western town in the Santa Monica Mountains. It's now part of the National Historic Registry, called Paramount Ranch. Most of it burned in the Woolsey fire recently, and my brother and I are helping to work with the National Park Service to rebuild it, the fundraising efforts. But and that was all built out of recycled materials. And my grandfather kind of grew up somewhat orphaned in New York and ended up doing a lot of metal recycling and started a bottling business. And during World War II, he patented a machine to remanufacture bottle caps. So it's actually, there's a couple parallels that I'm becoming more aware of, that, we think we're doing things in our own path, but there seems to be some history. I mean, there's been a history of recycling, there's been a history of repurposing, there's been a history of interacting within the kind of movie industry to create a set. And in my Californication house, which I did in Venice many years ago, was the main scene for that television series with David Duchovny. And then where I live now, Xanadu in Malibu, is a whole movie ranch that was built by this fantastic scenic designer named Tony Duquette. And I've been restoring all of the sets and creating a kind of retreat center out of these things. And it's adjacent to the 747 Wing House, which you referenced earlier, which was the other half of the Tony Duquette estate. And he was a master of repurposing, and the Wing House was about radical reuse and recycling. And so I guess, all these things are interweaving, these interests and upbringings. But I was always interested in building things. That I was always interested in the kind of the meaning of making and craftsmanship, and architecture seemed to be a perfect field. And I was cutting classes in high school and going to architecture school with a mentor of mine that I used to do, carpentry and wood, hardwood floors and build furniture with. And he was in architecture school, and I just started cutting class and going to architecture school.
So, okay, now you got, would you walk me through the process, whether it's the 747 house or any of the homes or any of the things that you've built? I'm just really curious how the collaboration with the client and the whole process sort of starts, because, I would never have the vision, I guess, to do many of the types of work that you've done, or that your clients have done, like this Tony Duquette. I mean, I would never. Well, maybe now I would, after I've met you and seen some more of these things and heard about it. But I'm really curious how the process goes, what type of person and what the collaboration is like. If you can describe it in a typical way, maybe you can't. I don't know.
Well, every client's different, but it's absolutely a collaborative and iterative process. I mean, the client has to go along with the idea. They've got to fund the idea. They have to be willing to take the risk and be adventurous. So without the client, I mean, you really don't have anything. But in the case of the Wing House, it was just kind of an organic idea that I just stood on this amazing site looking at this mountain range and just imagined a floating roof. The only thing the client had asked said, "I love your work, but it's very masculine. It's very kind of orthogonal and maybe planar, and I want something more feminine," which was an interesting challenge. I hadn't really thought about it in that way. And so I thought about this light, kind of floating, thin roof that, had a very sinuous line and was, graceful yet strong. And I just proposed. I began by photographing an airplane. I got the commission. I was going on a trip. I was flying, and I started taking a telephoto lens and photographing the kind of soft, curvilinear form of an airplane, which I just noticed in a different way. And then I thought, the wing is an incredibly strong floating shape. And I actually started the idea with this idea of a floating roof that was wing-like. And then I said, why not just use a wing? Wing's already engineered to be incredibly strong, to use materials in the most efficient manner with the highest strength and lightest weight. And I remember seeing all of these tails of airplanes kind of desiccating in the desert of obsolescence in the California deserts. And so I kind of first started to show my client, like, is this what you mean by feminine? And they were just zoomed in close-ups of the airplane, and they were undeniably feminine. Then I zoomed out and said, well, the airplane's super feminine. You don't think of it that way, but what if we just kind of get these giant wings and float them over the landscape and just put glass in? And to her credit, she said, let's go look at them. And so we went out to the desert, stood under the wings. Oh my God, these are just, beautiful. So we bought a 747, or she bought a 747, and then we cut it up and closed 5 freeways and brought it to a local airport and cut it in half and used a Chinook helicopter to carry the wing halves to the site, and then crane them into place, reached up and grabbed them at the engine mounts and enclosed them with glass.
Wow. Just a little bit of logistics there.
Yeah, we had 17 governmental agencies through about a year and a half. And as we were inquiring post 9/11 as to the structural properties of 747, pretty soon we got a visit from Homeland Security.
Oh, yeah.
They wanted to know what our interest was, and then
Yes.
Ended up working with some agencies to kind of do some airflow dynamics on the project, which was interesting. Had to work with the FAA, so it's not seen as a downed aircraft in the flight pattern. So some multiple agencies, and I think that's part of what I enjoy. At the end of every no is a yes kind of idea, that that you're dealing. There's something challenging about dealing with a bureaucracy which is inherently risk adverse. So like, how do you get something done? And how do you do something that's never been done before within an incredibly restrictive bureaucracy? How do you kind of use those rules to still do something? It's like with art, you could, you're it's almost scarier, because it's like, oh my God, what am I going to come up with? Pure
Right.
expression. But for me as an architect, it's like, okay, well, how do I use all of these confines and come up with something creative? I have a budget, I've got a site, I've got physics, I've got, all these systems. I like the creative problem solving of, kind of, actual things, and then ultimately into a form. And a project that, is similar to the wing house in that way, I just finished on the island of Beckway in St. Vincent and the Grenadines for a British couple. And I built the house kind of inspired by an old wooden ship. And we bought a pier in Borneo out of ironwood. I designed and extruded our own aluminum in Java, and then pre-assembled the entire buildings in Bali and shipped 15 containers to the Caribbean, and then assembled it as a kit of parts, with the roofs all being these huge tensile membranes that collect all of its own water, that are all open air. And it's a really beautiful indoor outdoor relationship that has like the rigging of sailboats and mast, but the warmth of wood. And so that was, a heroic act with German engineers and Indonesians and Caribbeans and British clients, and that was like the logistical challenge. And we brought a 747 to Burning Man, and used it as a giant art car. So, there's all kinds of logistics around this. So I guess I'm challenged by the logistical things and the unconventional aspects of it.
And that assembling the this newest home from all these containers, is that more difficult than if it was built on site? I'm just thinking everything, sometimes when you build on site, you can sort of make adjustments and stuff, but you have to have everything sort of just right to assemble it, or
yeah. Well, the part of the beauty of it is that, like if you have two pieces of aluminum, it's perfectly square, and you have one tool, they're like going to be 90 degrees. Like it was a kit of parts that was all pre-manufactured that actually was a lot easier in a way to assemble. The big challenge is that doesn't have any forgiveness, and that has to fit on a foundation, which, built by the Caribbeans, in a much looser way than, the German engineer, precise engineering. So you have to kind of design in a kind of way in which those two can be compatible.
And the 747 house, that was the first time that that had ever been done anywhere, and which is amazing. And so I'm wondering, the client, after, I'm assuming it's a woman, after she's in this home, does she have any privacy, David? Because I would think that people would be coming, from all over the world to see this and run by this.
Well, fortunately, she has a large property, and it's very private, and that's why it can also be all glass, largely all glass. So yeah, it's a unique in that way. Actually, I was going to just turn on a different background and show you that wing house. So that's the wing house. What you see is the left and right wings, and then the master bedroom, which is the third wing level, are made from the two horizontal tail stabilizers, and they're all put together. So you can see how it goes from about like 8 feet thick here to a couple inches thin. So it's a really dynamic sculptural piece in the way in which the forms interact, and the way you move around it. It has a lot of very different views, and so it's fun. And now I live right next door, and I kind of get different glimpses of it.
Oh,
so
neat.
that's really been wonderful to be there. And so sometimes we do events and things where we'll kind of open up the two properties together. This is another kind of view that shows it kind of cantilevering out over the hill.
Oh yeah.
So that view looks so different. Here's a couple other views, of the wings. So it's it's about radical reuse and repurposing. It's sculpture. It integrates well into the landscape. This is a big engine cowling that is used as a fire element. That's the inside.
Oh, so you used a bunch of that plane. You didn't just use the
and
wings,
we have other structures that we're actually currently building out of the fuselage sections.
Huh. Now I know why the FAA wanted to, where they might mistake that as a downed aircraft. It's kind of in the middle of, a huge piece of property, and you see it, and
Yeah. So flying over, it has to be mapped. So that that was really a wonderful challenge. And again, back to your question, I mean, it takes a client that has the willingness to take the risk to do that. This is the sail house project I was just speaking of.
Oh, the one you just did. Okay.
And you see it's all these low slung tensile membranes. The hot air comes out of the top of the building, and the rain keeps out of the top, and then it's all collected. All the rain is collected into the foundations. This is kind of a view, of the mast-like elements. Oh, I'm not sure if you're seeing those.
I think
Yeah,
I can see them. Yeah.
were you seeing the backgrounds change?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
Yeah. It's really good.
And so yeah, there's different different views. I think I have a couple of those, but yeah, it's really appropriate to its site. The prefabricated nature. The clients are sailors, and so it's like living on a kind of a land yacht in a way. So I think I have a couple more. I just happen to have a couple background shots that not really prepared as a slideshow, but
No, that's okay. How do you manage a project like that? Or do you have to go and live there for some period of time, or can you do it from California, or how do you?
yeah, we do it all from California. I mean, it's really great to take projects that involve some travel and interesting places. So, I mean, going to Indonesia and Java, we did a lot of our early design work on a old wooden boat called a Fenisi in Indonesia. It's like, why sit in a hotel room when you could just work kind of in a moving office.
Right.
And so so yeah, we had to do some travel there. I was actually supposed to be on Beckway right now photographing the project, um, and but the volcano in St. Vincent has been making that difficult for us.
That's a
So
night view that you have up there
there's
now.
a night view of it,
Yeah,
and you
that's
can kind of see
fantastic.
the wooden elements of it,
Right.
but and the mast, the rigging, and the water collection systems. So yeah, there there's always work. I mean, it's all collaborative. I generally come up with kind of the big ideas, and then I work very closely with my project architects and project managers and clients and consultants. It takes a whole team to pull these projects off.
So as if you don't have enough things going on, this X Prize for Water Abundance comes along, $1.5 million X Prize, I think it was, in 2018 or 2017 when it came along. I don't know exactly, but what makes you want to throw your hat in the ring on that? Because for so for well, why don't you explain how it actually works? Because I could explain it, but that would be dumb when you've actually done it.
Sure. Well, so for most people that maybe that don't know, the X Prize is basically taking off on the idea of an incentive prize that has a kind of force multiple that proposes that if we have a challenge, like a global challenge, why don't we create an incentive prize to someone to try to get that challenge? But the impacts on that challenge will be exponential because let's say you have 100 teams competing and they're all putting in money, then there's going to be more advancement to promoting that kind of nascent technology or that global challenge. So, if Elon puts up $100 million, that's going to be enough incentive that it's going to probably get, billions of dollars of investment in that space. In the case of the Water Abundance XPRIZE, the challenge was to look at, a global crisis of water scarcity. When you think about water on our planet, it's quite amazing. We have about only 0.22%, less than 0.25% of all the water on the planet is drinkable. It's unevenly distributed. Most of the water is salt or frozen. So when you think about water in vapor form, there's 6 times more water in the atmosphere at any given time, right at the point of use. And then all the rivers on the planet. So how do you harness that? And how do we address water scarcity? The United Nations says in the next 10 years, demand for water is going to outstrip supply by 40%. That's going to have a huge kind of threat multiple that's going to force competition for resources, migration, food. I mean, it's the essence of life.
Certainly
So
not the democratization.
certainly not the democratization. And I think what Peter Diamandis talks about, in his book Abundance is an interesting premise, and that is that perhaps there are enough resources on the planet to feed everyone. We just haven't been smart enough as a human species to figure out how to do that efficiently. And when you think about our current systems, they're incredibly inefficient and incredibly wasteful. And the idea of atmospheric water is very compelling. So the idea was to create an international challenge to make 2,000 liters of water from air in 24 hours using 100% renewable energy and a cost that could not be more than 2 cents per liter. And there were over 100 teams from 27 countries. And what was interesting about it is we were not selected into the second round of the competition, which we were obviously very disappointed by. And it led us to think, wow, there must be other people that have better technologies than we do. And the competition went on for about 3 months without us. And those finalists all got money and time to advance the competition. And then but it was clear that they couldn't make these goals either. So they dug back into their 5 teams advanced. We were the 6th. So they invited us back into the competition, but there was no equalization. They didn't give us the same money. They didn't give us any time. They said the race is in progress. You could join it or not. And that just pissed me off enough to just want to really go. And I said, well, actually, it's kind of interesting because now we're stealth. These other teams don't even really know that I exist, and we're in the competition, and we could just kind of quickly mobilize. And so I didn't have any time to raise money for this next phase. So I actually took a home equity line for $1.5 million out on my house and bet it all in putting this competition together, and put a ragtag team of people that I knew from Burning Man and, a team of doers, along with some real innovators in the space of biomass gasification, that basically converts biomass into energy, but it also creates a kind of a 2x waste factor of heat. And that's where the synergies really started. Is I cracked the code on the energy source, which nobody could do. But not only did I crack the code on the energy source, I started to aggregate the possibilities around what do we do with this heat, because I knew that more water is available in air, the hotter it gets. You also have to dry the biomass. The biomass has moisture in it. So you could dry the biomass, create essentially an augmented atmosphere, because the limitations of atmospheric water generation is generally limited by its location and how hot and humid it is. And so if we can create our own heat and humidity, we could essentially have water being made anywhere. We have our own energy source in abundance. With that, I can do refrigeration, and we sequester biomass, which otherwise would degrade and contribute to atmospheric, essentially greenhouse gases, methane, hydrogen, carbon dioxide, and turn it into actually a beneficial product in the form of biochar that goes into soil systems and soil revitalization system to grow more biomass. So you end up in this kind of closed loop cycle where you're kind of solving waste management issues with mobile energy issues and sequestering atmospheric carbon, making water. So I've been really expanding that now into the implementation phase, into these resilience hubs, this idea that it's a community-owned micro utility where, especially in the developing world, a community could own and operate and make its own electricity, refrigeration, kind of battery storage, swapping, and and tie right into regenerative agricultural systems.
So when you didn't make it to the next round, and then you were brought in, did your idea change, or did the technology change as you were moving forward, or did you just continue on the same path and then discover the energy part of it, and was the two combined the thing that really sort of got you to the winner's circle?
Yeah, that was that, but that was not necessarily part of it was some of the early concepts and the overall systems thinking around it, but that wasn't in place. And so sometimes, a healthy competition with a really strict deadline is the thing that makes the difference. You don't have time to fool around. You got to just go fast and forward. And that XPRIZE, gave us that. And so I knew enough as an architect. What architects do well is we're integrators in a way. Like we'll have an idea. I'm not the structural engineer, but I know enough to work with the structural engineer, the mechanical engineer, the geologist. So I was able to coordinate and assemble the team, but I had the vision about the way in which these things could be synergistic together.
Okay.
And then I kind of understood enough to kind of integrate them, put them into a form factor. And that was what won the XPRIZE. But really it was the renewable energy piece, because if you're trying to do this with energy, with solar, I mean, there are some systems that are really cool that use like desiccants, but they make very little water, so they couldn't compete on the volume. And then there are big systems that make mass amounts of water, but they're too expensive and they don't use renewable energy because they're too energy intensive. So this was an interesting challenge, because many people could have probably competed in the small water space or in the big water space, but where the impact is really needed in the world is on a kind of small village community scale water.
And so when you won, that had to be tremendous. That had to feel tremendous. And I'm wondering, were you able with the prize money to pay off the line of credit on your house? Because that winning is just the first, that's sort of the validation, right? But the idea wasn't ready for, say, prime time or deployment, full scale deployment, right? So there has, yeah. So
well, no, I mean, I wasn't really able. I mean, basically, we spent almost that amount of money
right.
to get the XPRIZE. So, I mean, thank God I won. I mean, at least I was able to pay back that. Otherwise, I would have been, upside down $3 million. Right. But it wasn't like that. I was able to pay that back because of the expenses incurred to win that XPRIZE. And it's fantastic that we won. In the scheme of trying to solve the water problem, $1.5 million is not going to do it.
Okay, sure.
I mean, $100 million for a carbon is not going to do it. But it's a very small amount of money in the scheme of the problem that we're trying to solve.
So the WEDEW, which stands for Wood to Energy Deployable Emergency Water, right? Where is it now, David? And how does it work now? Where is it in use? What's the future for it? What are you hoping to accomplish, and how can people help?
Sure. So yeah, the WEDEW is the kind of productization of the XPRIZE technology. We do have several of them in operation in case studies. We have been successful in obtaining grants through kind of non-diluted capital to operate and show the performance of these machines. One of them is through the California Energy Commission grant, which I have in my ranch in Malibu, Sky Source Ranch. And we are proving that we could use renewable energy. To heat a building, cool a building, power a microgrid for the community, put power back into the grid, store it in batteries. And we're tying that back into regenerative agricultural systems with the biochar and some fire retardant soils and defense systems. We also have been advancing other global deployment case studies. So one of the first will be working with the United Nations World Food Program in Uganda in a settlement camp where there's a steady supply of wooden pallets and crates that typically get burned up. But there's also a wood shop that needs power. And the wood shop refugees make products that they could sell for sustenance. But they need energy, and they typically just run diesel generators, which cost a lot of money. So to use the wood to make the energy, make the wood to then have the byproduct of water and refrigeration for the camp is an example. We're doing another one in the Bahamas. A lot of what we're doing are on island nations because they're the first to feel the effects and the least to have contributed to them. Right. They're perfect example for what we are essentially as an island in space, with Spaceship Earth. And there more people are more conscious of what they're taking and where the waste is going. But they're also almost all diesel-based economies where diesel is transported using diesel. So the Bahamas are interesting because there's huge Caribbean pine forest, but they've been inundated with salt water and rising sea level rise. So there's a lot of standing dead biomass, and it's all diesel energy, and surprisingly, not really any fresh water sources. So we are working on a pilot project there. We're working on something in Southeast Asia using coconuts as a biomass, where these small community scale factories make coconut water, and they are rural, so they don't have electricity. They need refrigeration and they need water, and they have coconuts. So, we're looking for places that have biomass and put in systems. It's largely through nonprofits that are on the ground that are working with these communities, and it particularly makes sense where either the water is contaminated, like 80% of Bangladesh, or there is no water. You're far from the coast. You can't drill wells. So we hoped that more through impact investment and ultimately through venture capital, but more conscious capital and kind of profit for purpose model that would basically finance these WEDEWs, and then the community sells the instruments of service, and then with that they pay back the essentially through a recurring revenue stream model. It's like the power purchase agreement that fostered the whole solar industry. So that's kind of our financial model, and we've been in the process of really testing that and building this model out, and then we're kind of in a seed round of funding, and then we hope to really get more of a project financing round.
Does it matter the quality of the air in the environment where a WEDEW is placed? Like, I suppose in most places the quality of the air is probably fine, but I'm just thinking like regular water, if it's contaminated, you don't want to drink it. And if the air is, say, polluted and you condense the water vapor from the air, which I don't even know if that's exactly what you're doing, but I think it is, you get water. Is there any bearing on the quality of the water?
Sure, there can be, but just like water, I mean, air needs to be filtered, and the water needs to be filtered. So water, is this amazing substance because it has a memory. I mean, that's why it can hold a contaminant. So it's quite a simple process. Just like all the air we breathe in a building, we could just use filters to filter out impurities in the air, and then we can use filters to filter out any impurities in the water. But inherently the water is pure to start because it's pure distilled water, and its purest form, the newest form of water. It's not water that's been, say, sitting underground for a long time that could pick up other contaminants or being transported long distances or treated with chemicals. So it is still filtered and maintained, but it's essentially a pure form of water.
And does anything need to be added to it? Because my understanding is you don't want to be drinking distilled water all the time, or is that a myth?
It's kind of a myth. I mean, if you talk to like Dr. Andrew Weil from Harvard, he'll tell you that distilled water is really healthy and necessary and helps to kind of strip a lot of the heavy metals, toxins, and buildups. But there's a lot of kind of dissenting opinions about it. It's easy to mineralize if there's any concern. You literally just run the water through a mineralization filter.
Okay.
And you can get all the minerals that you want.
Got it. Okay.
But mostly we get our minerals from food, not really our water.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And you would have to consume a tremendous amount of distilled water to make any kind of impact.
So where's the best place for people to find out more? Is it skysource.org or is it?
Yeah, skysource.org is our website, and you'll see more there. David Hertz Architect Inc. Is our, if you're interested in what we're doing with our architecture projects. We're really looking for partners where there is biomass, where it makes sense. We're definitely looking to, we're kind of making haste slowly. Like, it's a big global challenge, and we're also going to need to really build out our team. I mean, I'm going to need a CEO and, really build out a world-class team of people that want to actually implement this. It's much bigger than my ability or my wife's ability to actually do. So part of it is this chicken and the egg, where you need the funding to get the management team, but you need the management team to get the funding.
Okay. So final question. The WEDEW now is essentially encased in a 20-foot shipping container, or maybe different sizes, but a 20-foot is what I've seen. And that brings me to you as an architect. Have you ever built, or have you considered building a home or something out of shipping containers? I see all different uses for shipping containers, and they're kind of cool, sort of like the wing thing, but they're geometrically maybe not so cool. So someone would have to. I'm just curious if that's something you've considered or maybe you've done.
I've designed but not built a container home, pretty early, but now it's pretty popular. I mean, it's to be derivative in a way, and I'd rather be more on the cutting edge of things, unless I could completely reinvent a way to do it. The thing that's cool about containers is that there's an abundance of them, generally locally. The thing that's not cool about containers is they're a monocoque structure, meaning that it's like an egg. I mean, once you cut a kind of hole in the shell,
loses all the strength.
You lose it. So you end up having to basically do a lot of redundant work to cut them up. And if you put them together, you're basically like duplicating everything, because you've got like two columns and another column. And they're inherently very boxy, and I'm sure that one could really transform them into something much more, and that would be a challenge. We're in the WEDEW, we're using 10-foot containers for each pod
10
that
foot.
interlock to a 40-foot for intermodal transport. And we have 20-foot containers. We're doing some interesting things with the kind of side opening containers, the way that the containers unfurl to create canopies or kiosk, and kind of just using the container more the way the container wants to be used, rather than trying to change it so much into a house.
Well, David, thank you so much for making time for me today. This has been so much fun and interesting to hear about all the things that you've been into and all the things that you still have yet in front of you. And just your whole journey's been really cool. And I'm going to spend more time on some of your homes because I only spent some time on a few of them. And now I want to really get into, all the different ones that I can see, because each one is its own, great home, but also like magnificent creation. And what you're doing with the WEDEW, and bringing water, creating this sort of micro utility concept, I think it's phenomenal. And really inspired by the work you're doing.
Oh, thanks. It's really fun to take the time out from doing it to think about why you're doing it. And
Right.
I appreciate the opportunity to kind of look at it, from childhood and through, and like where I am at 60, and it tends to be a really nice referential point of view to look at things in context, because the day-to-day is always just like chipping away incrementally, sometimes losing sight of the whole picture. So I appreciate that.
Well, I'm glad that we got the time to take that journey today. I've enjoyed it a ton.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the How'd It Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How'd It Happen podcast.